Our final lecture on the Industrial Revolution has to deal with what are some of the effects and how did people begin to take the ideas of the Industrial Revolution and begin to dive deeper into the implications and effects that happened because the revolution took place. So we'll begin with talking about philosophers of industrialization. The first philosopher we've already talked about is Adam Smith. Adam Smith came up with the idea of what's called laissez-faire economics. And what laissez-faire translates into English is hands-off. So think of this as hands-off economics. Whose hands are remaining off? As we previously discussed, it is government. Adam Smith all wrote about all the idea of competition. Competition between businesses is the best thing that can happen. If McDonald's was the only company making hamburgers, then McDonald's would only make hamburgers good enough, right, in order to be able to sell them most profitably. So if that's the only place you could get a hamburger, well, then you'd eat whatever you got there. But because there's Carl's Jr.'s and Hardee's and Wendy's and Burger King and literally any other restaurant that can make you a hamburger, that's going to put competition on not only McDonald's, but everybody else to try to improve, to make a better hamburger at a cheaper price. And that's going to help everybody in society, at least people who like hamburgers. What they're going to be looking for is a profit motive. You're trying to figure out how can I go and make money, whether I'm selling sneakers or belts or jackets or fighter jets. They're all about trying to create the most profit by making the best product and go from there. And so you're creating a system of free markets where the government is not picking winners and losers. The government is just allowing for the marketplace to take its care of itself. So again, this is Adam Smith's idea, that whole invisible hand, this ethereal, nebulous, can't really describe it, action that the economy takes. But the important thing that Smith emphasizes is that you should not interfere with the economy. The economy will rise, it'll fall with the natural ebbing and waning of business interests, but the government should not pick winners and losers in the marketplace. The public will, the invisible hand will, and that will eventually allow for people to benefit from that. Smith will come up with three natural laws of economics to help explain his theories, right, and drive them a little bit farther. And you'll dive deeper in that if you take an economics course. Smith is all about, and you should be able to equate Adam Smith with the idea of capitalism. As we previously studied in a couple different chapters already, capitalism is an economic system in which the factors of production, and remember those are land, labor, and capital, are all privately owned. They're owned by private individuals, and capitalism is where money is invested in business ventures in order to make a profit. I have a spare $10. I give it to a factory owner to help him build his business, and then he's going to pay me a portion, a fraction of the profits in order for my money to go and make money. Other capitalist economists of the time period include Thomas Malthus and David Ricardo. What Smith, Malthus, and Ricardo all agree, though, is that government should not help the poor. And this idea of capitalism, people like Malthus, Ricardo, and Smith all believe that poor people are poor because of bad decisions that they made during their life, or that they are fundamentally incapable of making more money. So this is going to have lots of implications that still resonate a little bit today in the modern world. The key thing to understand is that poor people cannot be poor if they just work harder, according to these economists. This is the old pull yourself up by the bootstraps mentality. Going to work for 12 hours and then go into a library and studying so that you can get the next degree, get the next information to move yourself up the rung of all the corporate ladders, and you won't be poor anymore. And obviously, this doesn't take into account lots of other various factors that help explain poverty a lot more. But what these economists are trying to stress is the idea that, again, capitalism is what's best for the marketplace, and that private individuals working in profit free models without government interference will help drive industrialization and, more importantly, profits for everyone. So this gets into a twofold, a diametrically opposed view of what do people believe of big businesses. People believe big businesses are these kind of big giant tycoons who are only interested in making money off of war or loans or hurting from people, or are they titans of industry? Are they people who are going out and helping the poor? The idea that a rising tide is going to lift all boats, helping everybody out rather than just that one person. And so we can talk then about different economists. We said Adam Smith, he's from Scotland. He's going to write The Wealth of Nations in 1776 that highlights all this in this. Again, with Smith, he's all about private individuals making their own individual choice out of their own self-interest. I, Mr. Cranmer, enjoy a hamburger, so I would like to have the best hamburger at the lowest price. And by having increased competition in the marketplace, I can go and I can try to go find that if it exists out there, a perfect one, or if I just make it myself. Everybody's out in search of profit. Okay, I'm going to get a teaching degree so that I can get a teacher to be able to make the most money off that way, to be able to live the lifestyle that I so choose. Same way if you're trying to be a dancer or a singer or an actor or a baseball player or a plumber or a lawyer. And so this is all about, again, trying to own the means of production. We'll keep rattling this again back and forth with you. But again, means of production is land, labor, and capital. And Adam Smith is again writing about laissez-faire capitalism. That's right, hands-off capitalism, where it's the government that's keeping its hands out of the marketplace. Other capitalist uh, philosophers include Thomas Malthus. Thomas Malthus was very concerned about the increase of population that we saw with the rise of increased food production out of the agricultural revolution in the 1700s. He saw population rising very quickly, and he was concerned that there would be this kind of what's referred to as a Malthusian bottleneck, a population bottleneck, where there'd be so many people being produced by people having fun on Saturday nights that they would be unable to support their own needs, that they'd be making more people than be able to raise food in order to be able to support them. Now, he did believe that technology would mediate this difference between the amount of people on there, but in his own lifetime, he was concerned that England would literally have too many people and not have enough food. What he did not see was, again, technology helping close this bottleneck with different advances in efficiency of raising crops, including technological developments such as better crop rotation, pulling nitrogen out of the air, and allowing for more people to exist with the more food. And that's how the world today is able to support 8, 9, 10 future billion people on the earth, whereas it would not even be feasible to think of a billion people being fed with the amount of food that we're doing right now back in the 1700s. Right? Other capitalist economists include David Ricardo. David Ricardo talked about the relationship between population and wages. Going off of what Malthus said, Ricardo believed that if population would increase, then that would drive wages down. Again, that's simple supply and demand. In this case, the supply is actually workers. If you have an increased supply of workers because the population is rising, that's actually going to drive the demand for workers down. You're going to pick any Joe Schmo off the street, and it's going to drive wages. What Ricardo says, parents, if they're making an economic decision for their children, when they're thinking about how can they help their children, particularly with wages, Ricardo argues that parents should have less children because if parents have less children, that'll lower the population of the workers. That means that factory owners and other people hiring would have to raise their wages in order to account for that. And so that's the basic argument that Ricardo is making. A final person that we're going to talk about is not really an economist, but is a scientist. But it's his ideas, Charles Darwin's ideas on evolution and survival of the fittest, that people are going to, particularly in the 1800s, really latch onto and apply to not only just society, but also to the economy. That the best businesses survive because they're the fittest, they're the most nimble, they're able to evolve and change. And so we see this ideas of Darwin talking about natural selection and evolution and these ideas in the natural world, and people begin to apply that not only just to businesses, but also corrupt it and change it and looking at applying it to different races of people. And we see all of the horrible implications that come out of that in the latter 1800s into the 1900s. So that's Adam Smith there on the left. On the right is Thomas Malthus. We have David Ricardo, and that's a picture of Charles Darwin on the right. That is capitalism. Capitalism is all about the idea of private ownership of the means of production of your own stuff, doing it for yourself. Well, there's other responses to, particularly what some people view the abuses of unrestrained capitalism. We begin to see that with the rise of other economic theories and other theories about running governments throughout the late 1700s to the 1800s. Here's with the rise of socialism. The first idea that comes out of this is the idea of utilitarianism. This is a theory that government actions are useful only if they promote the greatest good for the greatest number of people. The idea that the best thing you can do in society is figure out what has the greatest utility. What is a action or an idea that you can make that might hurt the smallest number of people, but will go and help the greatest number that there is. Excuse me. This idea that every decision the government can't be perfect, But if you try to help the greatest number of people, right, you're going to end up helping and promoting everyone else. And this is the idea that comes out of the late 1700s by Jeremy Bentham. And he's the big person who promotes this utilitarian idea, spreading it throughout England and the United States. John Stuart Mill is another person, particularly in the United States, who takes this idea and he begins to take this utilitarian belief and apply it to his workers. And so he believed that just because he's the factory owner doesn't mean that he should be profiting so much off of his workers. And so he's one of the first people that believed in equal division of profits. And you see this with certain companies today that provide stock options or companies that are owned by the workers themselves, so that everybody has an equal division of the profits. So that even though if you're a lowly janitor, if you do a better job of being a janitor, everything's cleaner, people are healthier, that if you do your job well, that's going to help everybody out there and you deserve an equal share of the profits. Whether you're the CEO, the CFO, right, the person who runs the place, or the parking attendant in the parking lot, everybody would get an equal share according to John Stuart Mill. And so he's also going to push ideas out of utilitarianism into more social issues of cooperative agriculture, working together, big proponent of women's rights, and also legal education and prison reform in society. Out of utilitarianism, and for this, we also get this idea dating back to what we talked about with Thomas More in his writing of Utopia, of the idea of trying to create utopian communities on Earth. People in the 1800s begin to look around and say, well, this unrestrained capitalism is causing all sorts of problems. Let's try to go and create perfect places that are models that can be shared and run and all from there. So Robert Owen is the big person who tries to put this into place. He tries this first in Scotland. He's unsuccessful. And then he goes and he moves to the United States, where these really start to take off and become well attended and survive for rather long times from there. The Oneida community in upper New York is a very famous community from this. The other theory that comes out of this idea as well is the idea of socialism. This is where the factors of production, again, land, labor, and capital, are owned and operated by the public for the welfare of all. So instead of a government owning, say, the water company or Mr. Cranmer's good old fashioned nice water, the everybody is responsible and operates this so that everybody has, well, in this case, water for everybody. So there's Jerry Bentham on the left. That's John Stuart Mill. And again, we see these ideas being taken over and moved into a rise of, particularly out of the Second Great Awakening movement in the United States in the late 1700s, early 1800s. We're going to see this. And the Oneida Colony in Upper New York is a pretty famous one. The New Harmony community down in southwestern Indiana is another pretty famous one. It also gets in the ideas of your Shakers, your Quakers, and also Mormons are also kind of caught up in this idea as well, trying to create their own perfect little world in the United States, in the world, that hopefully to be a model and inspiration for others to go and copy and create better working conditions for everyone. With the rise of socialism, right, out of socialism breeds a new way of looking at this in 1848. This is where the German journalist Karl Marx and the German Friedrich Engels sit down and they come up with their own idea, their own branch of socialism that they publish in a 23-page pamphlet, Communist Manifesto. And in just 23 short pages, they come up with a lot of important ideas that can have long lasting effects up until the present moment. What Marx says is that by looking at history, to understand history is to understand that history is one class struggle throughout, right? A struggle between the haves in society, people who have the means of production, and the have-nots, the people who are without it. And so he begins to say that society, since the beginning of humankind, has always been divided into these haves and have-nots. It's always been divided into these two warring classes. That's what history is. It's one class struggle after another. And that what he says in his own time, here in 1848, in the middle of the 1800s, it's the bourgeoisie, factory owners versus what he calls the proletariat, the workers in their own time. There's this war between the owners of the factory's production and the people working in the factories that's causing all of these different problems. And so Marx describes the wealthy controlling the means of production while the poor providing all the labor. What you probably can think is that Marx wants to bring about a change to this. Marx predicts in 1848 that eventually the workers will revolt and go and bring economic equality to all, and go and creating a new form of socialism called communism. This is a form of complete socialism in which the means of production will be owned by the people. Everybody communally is in it together. It's not my shovel, it's our shovel. It's not my farm, it's our farm. It's not my factory, it's our factory. Everybody owns everything. There's no private property. And in this way, everybody would, in theory, work together to be able to go and provide all sorts of them. Now, true communism, you really can be argued, is never really taken place. It's been tried in certain things. Even if you look at communism, say in communist China in the late 1900s or the Soviet Union, even then it's not really Marxian communism in and of itself. Today, the best example of a proto-communist nation is the nation of North Korea, because even places like Cuba have moved away from it because again, it doesn't work. Right? The idea that private property would cease to exist really doesn't mean anything, particularly for you guys as Americans who love having private property. And so the idea of taking this away is going to cause major issues. That's Marx with his big beard on the left, and then probably even more longer, impressive beard on the right is Frederick Engels. So again, what Marx describes is a history of humanity of two warring classes, the haves and have-nots. A primitive society where everybody has access to everything. Think of like hunter-gatherers, people out in the Serengeti, people in the Amazon. Have-nots, people who have nothing, right? Slave societies where you have master who have the haves, the slaves who provide the labor. In feudalism, you have the lords who have the stuff, the slave and the serfs who do the work. In mercantilism, the imperialist nation controls what the colonial nation do. In Marx's own time, he talks about the bourgeoisie and the proletariat and capitalism, and eventually he's trying to move up what he believes is superior forms of government and economics and socialism, where everybody has everything, and communism. And the have-nots in society are nobody, but again, we can see uh, numerous examples where communism just doesn't work, right? If you're a doctor being paid the same as somebody who digs ditches, what's the motivation for that doctor to go and learn new techniques or new other things if he's just going to be paid the same as a ditch digger who's not doing all that other stuff? So you can kind of see in that one rather crude example just how communism, in its truest sense, really hasn't been figured out by people as of right now in 2020. So it's this teeny tiny 23-page pamphlet that's going to cause lots of different problems. It's going to cause the deaths of hundreds of millions of people, right? Because of the ideas of trying to force this on others through this. And so again, you can see how this kind of works. You see critiques of capitalism from communists. This is from the industrial workers of the world in the United States in the 1800s. And again, you see the pyramid of capitalist systems, where the bottom we have the people who are working for you and feeding all of you. You have the factory owners who eat for you, the army who shoot at you. Marx was not a big fan of organized religion. He called organized religion the opiate of the masses. Think about opioids and opiates as kind of painkillers. From there, we rule you, and again, everything's controlled by the almighty dollar. So again, what Marx is calling for, if you take this pyramid and the workers topple it, everybody would then be equal. That's what he's pushing for in his society. Well, out of utilitarianism and socialism and communist thought, we begin to see people push for reforms towards the end of the 1800s. The big group that pushes for reform are unions. Unions are voluntary labor associations that workers join together. And by collectively voicing together, they're able to try to push for different reforms to help them out. Unions would speak for all workers to help them demand better wages and better working conditions. So it's not just Mr. Cranmer standing up for myself and then just easily being fired. It's all the workers in a business standing up for themselves, trying to help out. And what the workers hold is the ability to work. And so the tool that workers have at their disposal is that if they don't get what they want to demand better wages, they don't get better work conditions, they can strike. They can just refuse to work. The idea being that if there's nobody to run the factories, then the factories don't produce any goods. The goods can't be sold and nobody makes any profits. So that's the tool that they have. And it's out of these unions, that we begin to see other reforms that also help end the abuses of industrialization. And we begin to see a world that's very similar to ours that they have right now, thanks to unions fighting for better working conditions, 8-hour workdays, the end of child labor, so that children can go get an education, become better members of society, become more informed citizens, be able to go and make newer and greater things like the internet and other cool stuff, like landing an SUV on Mars. We see other reforms coming out of this, like the abolition of slavery in the United Kingdom, then the United States, and we finally seeing Brazil in 1888 finally ending its slave trade there, and slavery as you kind of probably think of it. And again, we can argue whether slavery exists in the world today, which it does in some places. But again, this is true slavery in the sense of buying and selling human beings, property. We begin to see the fight for women's suffrages moves out of this, the fight for women's rights, the suffragettes of fighting for not only the right to vote, but also other different rights, which is again an ongoing issue that we have still today. And again, we see education and prison reform as people are fighting right for these ideas. And again, like we said, this is all stuff that's still being built upon and arguing today.